Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of Rush Roots. Today we have Brendan here, and Brendan, why don't you tell us who you are and where you're from?
Sure. Hi, I'm Brendan Middleton. I am 44 years old. I live and work in northern New Jersey. I think I mentioned on the 2112 anniversary album that I was born in 76, same year as 2112. So that album's always kind of been special for me. And yeah, I work in the PR field and I'm a longtime Rush fanatic.
Awesome.
All right, that's awesome. All right, well, how did you get into Rush? What what got you into them, and what kept you around? Tell us your Rush roots.
My Rush roots. I would have been 15 in 1991. And 1991, I kind of think is a bit of an epic year for music. You had the first Lollapalooza, you had REM's Out of Time, you had U2's Achtung Baby, you had Pearl Jam with 10, you had Temple of the Dog, the first Smashing Pumpkins album, you had Blood Sugar Sex Magic from the Chili Peppers. I remember reading in my school newspaper about this new album, Nevermind by Nirvana. And this guy said, "This is the best album I've ever heard or will ever hear." And so my 15-year-old brain was absorbing music. I was fully awake and aware of music as a kind of a young music fan. I was learning to play guitar. My trusty Sony uh, went everywhere with me. And so I was I was really, really getting into all the cool modern music, a lot of which ended up being, kind of really historic modern music, historic music. I was getting into 80s and 70s music. And I was at a buddy of mine's house who's still a friend of mine today. And he said, "Check out my CD player." And my mind was just exploded by this CD player. This was the first time I had ever seen on demand music. You didn't have to rewind it. It was amazing to me. And we listened to a few different CDs. And he goes, "Check this album out." And he shows me this picture of a Dalmatian sniffing a red fire hydrant. And I heard those first booming notes of Subdivisions, and I'm sitting there listening, and it's a CD which, to me, sounded like the most crystal clear, perfect, beautiful fidelity imaginable.
Oh yeah.
And I'm listening to this, and on Subdivisions, Getty's vocals don't come in for almost a minute. So then I'm listening to Getty, and I'm like, all right, this is interesting and new. And I had no idea that this album was from the early '80s. And I'm like, this is cool. I'm really more of a guitar rock kind of guy. There's a lot of synthesizers going on. He says, "Well, check out their new album. It's brand new. It just came out like a month or two ago. Roll the Bones. I think you'll be into it." I'm like, okay. And he taped it for me. He dubbed it for me. And those out there listening who are old enough to remember, back in those days, you were always excited if an album was 45 minutes long because it could fit on one side of a 90-minute audio cassette. And I think it was
Yes.
48 minutes long, right?
Yes.
So I think You Bet Your Life was on side B, but he taped it for me. I popped it into my Walkman. I'm listening to it, absorbing it, really, really was into it. I was like, I'm listening to the future. There's something going on here. And then I got Chronicles, which at the time Chronicles, remember, was brand new. And that was Chronicles gets a lot of hate because the band wasn't involved in it. It was a money grab, whatever. It was the perfect sampler platter for a 15-year-old who was just getting introduced to them and listening to their arc from the 70s and the early 80s. And there's Subdivisions. I know that song. And then you're kind of experiencing a little bit of each era at the time. And that was just amazing to me. And I didn't become an instant fanatic. At the time, they were just one of many bands that I listened to and enjoyed. And over time, as I started to collect their albums and explore their full catalog and really start to connect with Neil's lyrics and start to connect with the musicianship and realize these guys are in a whole different league from everything else I'm listening to, it gradually sort of became a kind of a religion for me over time. And that's kind of my initial how I became a fan and how I stayed a fan.
Yeah, That's awesome. And yeah, that early '90s was an amazing time in music for sure. And it's really awesome that Rush stood out that way for you during that time.
You know, I should mention that just to add on that one thing, I should mention that when I first heard Roll the Bones and I saw that this was like their 14th album, and they've been now I think they've had 19 in their whole catalog, but this was their 14th, 30 years ago. I was like, oh, well, this is a band that's in its twilight. I'm really late to the party. I'm just glad that I'm getting to enjoy it now. And I had no idea that there would be. They literally weren't even halfway done as a band, as far as their longevity is concerned.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, why don't you tell us when, where, and what tour was your first Rush show? When was the first time you saw Rush?
Sure. So, although I was a hardcore fan by the time Counterparts came out, I didn't really have the mobility and the freedom and the disposable income to get to a show until Test for Echo in '96. And I made up for it. I saw a few shows on that tour. My first was at what is now the Wells Fargo Center, which at the time was the Core States Center. And that was November of '96.
It's in Philly, right? It's the Wells Fargo Center.
Philadelphia. That's right, Philadelphia. Yeah, great. Went with a bunch of friends, including the friend who had first introduced me to them back 5 years earlier.
Cool.
And that 2112 in its entirety was played on that tour. Natural Science, a great mix of stuff from a lot of stuff from Test for Echo, of course, but a lot of great classics from the entire catalog.
Yeah. And I believe that's the first tour that they played where there was no opening band. It was just basically an evening with Rush.
That was the first An Evening with Rush. It started exactly on time at 8:00, which
That never happens.
Yeah. Who does that? What band starts right on time so perfectly that, as you know, 2112 started at 9:12 p.m. It was it was 21:12 p.m. It was so perfectly synchronized.
Yeah.
And I did not need or want an opening act. I would have loved to have seen Primus and other openers, of course, over the years, but it was amazing to see just 3 hours of solid Rush.
That's awesome. All right. Well, what was your first favorite song and your first favorite album, and how does it differ from your favorite song and favorite album today?
So it doesn't differ. It's really, for me, it's always been about hemispheres for me. Cygnus X1 Book 1 and 2 are both amazing, but there's something about the epicness of hemispheres. And again, because I'm from the 80s and 90s era, I do think in terms of like side one and side two of albums.
Yep.
So side one of Hemispheres, the fact that they pushed themselves, by their own admission, they pushed themselves and challenged themselves so hard with that album, and you can really hear it. The whole concept of the duality and the balance between logic and emotion just really stayed with me. The musicianship of that album and of that track, that 18-minute opening track, has always, for me, just been so singular. And it's so timelessly relevant. Over the past 4 years, who hasn't wished that Rocinante would appear in the sky and just kind of bring some, balance and unity and, a voice in all the chaos and divisiveness. So it's always going to be about Hemispheres for me, both as an album and Book 2 as an opening track.
Oh yeah. Yeah, fantastic song, fantastic album, Oh yeah. Cool.
Absolutely. All right, well, we'll wrap with this question. Why don't you tell us where people can find you on social media, your Instagram handle, I guess, so that people can either get to know you a little bit more as a Rush fan, or perhaps you can become Rush friends.
Yeah, absolutely. I welcome it. I'm not a big social media person, but I am, just my full name, Brendan Middleton, on Instagram. You'll see me sometimes chime in on some of the Rush fans conversations. I don't post a lot, but there's a few choice, Rush posts and observations, celebrating the birthdays of favorite albums and things like that. Always happy to connect with fans and, talk about one of my favorite subjects.
Awesome. All right, Brendan. Well, thanks very much for joining us today. And again, Brendan Middleton on Instagram, if you want to reach out to him. That being said, we'll wrap. Take care.
Thank you so much for having me, guys.
All right.